From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hannah Zubairi. First, the headlines. American honor killings rates are worse than Turkey. Arizona Republican Audit confirms Biden defeated Trump. Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians in occupied West Bank. A new state-of-the-art Islamic university to open in Indonesia. Our top story tonight is on an FBI analysis that finds that 92% of female homicides in 2018 in the United States involved women or girls killed by a man they knew. A Guardian report about the data notes that 63% of American women were killed by husbands, ex-husbands, or boyfriends. This puts intimate gendered killings at a staggering rate of almost 3 women per day. In Turkey, the murder of a 27-year-old woman by her ex-boyfriend last summer sparked global protests. Yet the rate of women killed there is below that of the United States. In 2019, 474 women were killed in Turkey, compared to 2,991 women in the United States. A final report by a partisan Arizona review of ballots confirms President Joe Biden defeated his predecessor, Donald Trump. CNN reports that Cyber Ninja CEO Doug Logan said the ballots provided for the count accurately correlate with the official canvass numbers. The hand recount found President Biden gaining 99 votes in Maricopa County and Trump losing 261 votes. Now Texas is starting a review of ballots in 4 of the state's largest counties at Trump's request. The United States on Friday cleared a path for aid to flow into Afghanistan. Despite sanctions on the Taliban, the U.S. Treasury Department is issuing general licenses, Afghanistan's Tolo News reports. One allows aid from the U.S. government, NGOs, and certain international groups. The second authorizes transactions related to export, re-export of food, medicine, and other items. Meanwhile, the Afghan Society of Muslim Youth on Friday sought help from international community and charitable groups. The group demands that the U.S. release $9.5 billion in frozen assets from Afghanistan's central bank. It also calls on the Taliban to reopen girls' schools, create jobs, and pay wages to government employees. In Germany, center-left Social Democratic Party has defeated the Christian Democratic Union. German Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats had its worst election outcome. The environmentalist Greens Party came in third, followed by the pro-business Free Democrats. The results give significant leverage to the 2 smaller parties that almost certainly will be part of any new government. It is the first time Germany is facing a 3-way coalition. Merkel will remain in power until a coalition is formed, which could take several months. Thousands protested in the Indian state of Assam on Friday. This was a day after 2 Muslims were killed by police during a protest. The demonstration was against the Indian government evicting Muslim families from their homes with only 24-hour notice. 20 people were also injured and 30 remain missing. Assam's government has faced widespread condemnation over its tactics. Critics say the move is the latest example of anti-Muslim discrimination under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party. Authorities have imposed an indefinite ban on gatherings after a video from Thursday's protest went viral on social media. It shows police in riot gear beating a protester with batons. An opinion piece in Israeli newspaper Haaretz last week said that Hindu mobs and an anti-Muslim boycott in India resemble Germany during the 1930s. The Israeli army killed 5 Palestinians during overnight military raids early Sunday in areas of occupied West Bank. The raids led to armed confrontations in Jenin and Jerusalem. Palestinian Health Ministry spokesman Mohammed Hayal told Al Jazeera 3 of those killed were from the village of Biddu in northwest Jerusalem. They were identified by their families as Ahmad Zahran, Mahmoud Hamidan, and Zakaria Badwan. The 2 others killed were 22-year-old Osama Sabuh and 16-year-old Yusuf Sabuh from the village of Burkin, southwest of Jenin city. Israeli media reported 2 Israeli soldiers were seriously injured and have been hospitalized. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas gave Israel 1 year to withdraw to 1967 boundaries at the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Friday. Abbas offered to negotiate over the next 12 months. He threatened to reverse recognition of Israel and press for further charges at the International Court of Justice if demands are not met. Within this year, the Palestinian Authority would be willing to work with Israel on borders and other issues, Abbas said in a pre-recorded video message from Ramallah. The Palestine Liberation Organization recognized the 1967 borders as part of the Oslo peace process in the 1990s. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has said his government will not allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is investigating Israel and the Palestinians for war crimes committed since 2014. Members of the British House of Commons recently had a 2-hour debate on human rights concerns in Kashmir. Amanda Milling, appointed Minister for Asia, told the MPs India and Pakistan must find a lasting political solution to the situation in Kashmir. She emphasized that it must take into account the wishes of the Kashmiri people. MPs from all political parties condemned India's human rights abuses in Kashmir. They decried the closure of Amnesty International in India, as well as the revocation of Articles 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution on Kashmir. This Saturday, hundreds gathered at the UN General Assembly in New York, demanding Kashmir's right of self-determination. This has long been promised by India and Pakistan and endorsed by the UN Security Council. Speaking to UN General Assembly, Prime Minister of Pakistan Imran Khan said that under Modi, India has rescinded the autonomy of Kashmir and reiterated the need for a free and fair plebiscite in disputed Jammu and Kashmir in accordance with UN Security Council resolutions to the long-running dispute, the only way for sustainable peace in South Asia. Recep Tayyip Erdogan raised the topic of Kashmir at the session of the UN General Assembly. He said he's in favor of solving the issue through dialogue between parties and framework of the United Nations resolutions. The Indonesia International Islamic University in Depok, West Java, is finally opening its doors to students next week, administrators told the Jakarta Post. Officials have touted the $50.4 million project, which has been under construction for 3 years, as the answer to a growing need for an academic center on modern Islamic civilization. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim-majority country. The university is expected to launch the nation's Islamic studies scholars onto the global stage. The European Union on Thursday said it will impose a universal charger for smartphones, clashing with Apple and its widely used iPhone connector cable. The European Commission believes a standard cable will cut down on electronic waste, but Apple says a one-size-fits-all charger will stop innovation and create more pollution. Imposing USB-C as a cable standard on the EU's 450 million people could have a decisive effect on the global smartphone market. Consumers now have 3 main chargers to power their phones: Lightning cables for Apple products, micro USB widely used for most mobile phones, and USB-C chargers. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September. I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Despite the closure of U.S. military bases and withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, the United States continues to maintain around 750 military bases abroad in 80 foreign countries and territories. To discuss the finding of a recent report published by Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Ina. America has come out of Afghanistan. A whole lot of saying they should not have come out of it. They're being attacking Biden on why they came out, what is wrong, everything is messed up in the universe. While there are more American bases around the world, 750 to be exact. So while we are out of Afghanistan, probably we are still in the neighborhood. Is it good for the peace? Why these bases are there? How do they contribute to American security? And do we really need them? To discuss all of that with us is David Vine. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Imam, thank you so much for having me.
David Vine is professor of anthropology at American University in Washington, D.C. David, my first question is, how come a person who's an anthropologist is writing about the US bases around the world?
It's a good question. It does surprise people. Sometimes my work looks like a combination of anthropology and political science and history and economics. But I think the important thing is that anthropology, from my perspective, forces me, when I look at a question like US military bases abroad or US wars or the long history of US wars, it forces me to look at the people at the center of these wars and at the center of military bases and the effects that military bases have. So that's where anthropology helps shape my work. So often analyses of wars and military bases and military matters are really sort of disembodied and far from the realities of war, which I think, first and foremost are about death and destruction and terrible trauma.
Now, how did you come up with the number of 750 bases around the world?
So I've been working with a transpartisan group of scholars and advocates and think tank analysts and others who have concerns about the number of US military bases that have been surrounding the globe since World War II. And these are people across the political spectrum, everyone from people affiliated with the Koch Foundation, Charles Koch, to people associated with Code Pink, Noam Chomsky, a really wide swath of the political spectrum, is now increasingly concerned about why the United States has so many military bases overseas and what they're doing in the world and whether they're actually making the United States and the world any safer or more secure. In the past roughly half a year, two colleagues of mine and I in this transpartisan group, which is called the Overseas Base Realignment and Closure Coalition, two colleagues, Leah Bolger and Patterson Deppen, and I undertook a new report called Drawdown. And the report provides the most comprehensive list, we believe, the most comprehensive list of US military bases abroad available, far more comprehensive than the most recent Pentagon report, which is notorious for having widespread omissions and errors and inaccuracies. And in our report, Drawdown, we estimate that indeed the United States now possesses approximately 750 military bases outside the 50 states in Washington, D.C., in 80 foreign countries and colonies, 750 bases in 80 countries and colonies.
How many of these bases surround Afghanistan?
Yeah, I was encouraged that the Biden administration withdrew U.S. troops and U.S. bases from Afghanistan. This is something that should have been done long, long ago. The war itself should, in my view, never have been fought. And that was the original error, to wage a war on terror, a so-called war on terror, and to invade and occupy Afghanistan. But with the withdrawal of troops and bases from Afghanistan, many have overlooked the fact that there are dozens upon dozens of U.S. military bases in the region surrounding Afghanistan. So really throughout the Middle East, there are indeed scores of U.S. military bases. Bases as far as Europe, of course, have been used to wage the war in Afghanistan and Iraq as well. So the U.S. military has a really entrenched infrastructure of bases that part of the central argument of our Drawdown report is that we need to close these bases. The withdrawal from Afghanistan is completely insufficient. And my greatest fear is that if we don't begin to close more bases abroad, the United States will end up in yet more wars. The endless war is not over with the end of U.S. warfare in Afghanistan. The United States is still waging war in Iraq and in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia. We need to make sure the United States does not engage in yet more wars and indeed bring the other endless wars to an end.
So what was the reasoning for starting to establish U.S. bases around the world?
So the United States, really since independence, began building bases abroad, that is bases on other people's territories. Now, of course, the first U.S. bases abroad were those on Native American peoples' lands and territories. And those bases, U.S. Army forts, enabled and made possible the expansion and conquest of the United States across North America, which of course resulted in the deaths of millions, the dispossession of millions of Native Americans in the process. It was really during and after World War II, however, that the United States built an unprecedented global collection of bases abroad, of foreign military bases, a collection larger than that of any empire or people or country in world history. It was during World War II that this collection of bases, this global network sprung up. But after World War II, it remained firmly in place and was a key facet of the U.S. strategy in the Cold War to maintain hundreds upon hundreds of military bases abroad and hundreds of thousands of troops as close to the Soviet Union as possible. With the end of the Cold War, now more than 3 decades ago, again, there were closures of some bases abroad. About 60% of the U.S. bases abroad closed, but a very substantial network of bases, the basic infrastructure, remained very much in place. And in fact, in the 3 decades since the end of the Cold War, the total number of bases has shrunk about in half, from roughly 1,600 to now 750. But the breadth of the collection of bases has actually doubled in size. So at the end of the Cold War, there were U.S. bases in 40 countries and colonies. And today, there are U.S. bases in roughly 80 countries and colonies, showing how broad this global network has become, especially increasingly in Africa, parts of Central and Eastern Europe, where there wasn't a U.S. military presence previously.
Don't you think that with the presence of China being the forthcoming competitor and somewhat of a somewhat of a Cold War is brewing there, these bases are going to become once again useful?
I am not sure they were very useful during the Cold War. I think they deepened the tensions of the Cold War, and a war that we should remember brought us, very close to nuclear Armageddon, a war that, could have wiped out human existence on Earth. And I am deathly afraid that we are indeed in a new Cold War with China that is deepening by the day. So, within a month of Biden's withdrawal of U.S. forces and bases from Afghanistan, he announced just about 10 days ago with the leaders of Australia and the UK, this new alliance. They like to call it AUKUS, which is a terrible acronym or initialism. I've been calling it the Triple Alliance, because in many ways, this new military alliance reflects not just thinking from the original Cold War, but really from the 19th century. And we know that a series of competing alliances got the world into World War I, which of course then gave birth to World War II and the Cold War that followed. I am very much afraid that this new military alliance is only bringing us closer to the brink of a formal declaration of a new Cold War with China that could so easily spin completely out of control and become very much a hot war, potentially nuclear war, involving these two nuclear armed powers, the United States and its allies, and China.
Do you think the reaction of France, which was very open, very strong, and very public, and is still, other than one phone call, it seems to continue, is giving us a space in which European Union, led by France or Germany, sort of play a role of a buffer and non-aligned countries between a competition with the United States and China?
Well, I would love it if European countries and other countries around the world could play more of a moderating role and mediating role. The United States under the Biden administration, very troublingly, disturbingly, seems to have turned its back on diplomacy. The turning away from the war in Afghanistan was, in my mind, exactly what the Biden administration should have done, but it should have then fully embraced diplomacy as the main fundamental part of its foreign policy. Instead, with this new military alliance, it seems to be doubling down on war as as U.S. foreign policy, which war has been U.S. foreign policy really since World War II at very least. And this, again, I think is very dangerous, very reckless. I think it's important to point out this new alliance is downright racist. 3 white male leaders standing up and saying we get to control what goes on in the seas and air of East Asia is very troubling and really smacks of colonialism. Now, part of the reason why our report, Drawdown, this report with my co-authors Leah Bolger and Patterson Deppen for the Quincy Institute and World Beyond War, the argument is not just close all the bases abroad. The argument is draw down and then build up. And what do we mean by build up? We mean build up the U.S. diplomatic presence abroad while drawing down, closing U.S. bases abroad. Just one last comparison, I think, shows where the priorities of U.S. foreign policy have been and where they need to go. While there are 750 U.S. military bases abroad in 80 countries and colonies, there are only 276 U.S. embassies, consulates, and missions. So nearly 3 times the number of bases compared to consulates, embassies, and missions shows you where the priority has been for U.S. policymakers. It's been with war, and that's what needs to change.
So the lower number of embassies and consular offices, but do you think the diplomatic presence overall is as small footprint as compared to bases?
No, the diplomatic presence is insufficient. When it comes to diplomacy, the numbers are not the sole criteria that we should evaluate. We think we can also look at the budgets for the State Department compared to the Pentagon. Just take the bases abroad, the 750 bases abroad. On an annual basis, U.S. taxpayers are paying around $55 billion a year to maintain and operate these bases. And that doesn't include the military personnel and civilians who work on the bases. That brings the total to well over $100 billion a year, most likely. Compare that to the size of the State Department's budget, the main actor in our diplomacy, and that budget is actually smaller than the entire budget just to maintain U.S. bases abroad. Again, this is part of what needs to change as a reflection of a shift toward diplomacy and positive engagement, peace building, the reduction of violence, and the avoidance of war at all costs. That's what our foreign policy should revolve around rather than war.
Is there any conversation among the think tanks who are connected or supportive or deliberate on what a State Department does to increase the budget of the State Department?
There's certainly people calling for an increase in the size of the State Department's budget, and under the budget for next year, the next fiscal year is still being debated and worked out. It would increase, but the more troublingly, Congress is in the works right now of increasing the size of the Pentagon's budget, even beyond what President Biden requested and the Pentagon itself requested. The Pentagon and President Biden requested far too much money, and we're talking upwards of $750 billion. And that's not even the total sum that U.S. taxpayers spend on the military on an annual basis. It's actually closer to $1 trillion, including money that we owe in debt for past spending, nuclear weapons and others. But the Congress right now wants to spend even more money than President Biden and the Pentagon requested, which I think underlines the fact that the winner of the past 20 years of endless war, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and in 23 other countries where U.S. combat troops have fought, the winners have been the military industrial congressional complex, the weapons manufacturers who benefited so greatly from the massive spending that has been poured into war in the past 20 years. That is what needs to change. The size of the U.S. military budget is drastically out of perspective and to the threats actually facing the United States, and exceeds the size of almost the entire every other country's military on earth combined. This is what needs to change.
Don't you think it's an uphill battle to have a conversation on this topic, which can become a mainstream, considering that according to different polls, including Gallup, one of the most liked institution in America is not Congress, not the president, not the religion, but it is the U.S. military.
It is. Yes, this is part of the problem, I have to say, that there has been a sort of culture of militarism, a celebration of war. Now, the people in the U.S. military are ones that I care deeply about. And, I think the best way to serve them and protect them is to ensure that we don't send them into yet more wars, and that we withdraw them from the current endless wars where U.S. troops are deployed. I think one of the problems is that really, I don't want to characterize them as frankly as I might like to, but members of the military-industrial congressional complex have frequently invoked the troops and invoked the nation to benefit financially, personally, and at a corporate level, while really their concerns have been about their bottom lines, not about the troops or about the nation. They have served their own interest while undermining the security of the United States and the world, to say the least.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time to talk.
Thank you. David Vine is professor at the American University at Washington, D.C. Back to you, Hina.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.